the excitement of the counterattack gradually subsided. The companies reported the losses of personnel. Contrary to expectations, they were small. Obviously, the enemy did not count on a counterattack, and our friendly volley stunned him. The subsequent rush to meet us, the hand-to-hand fight, knocked the Krauts out of their usual rut. The German soldier is a pedant, acting according to a once-established pattern. If the situation changes, he gets lost. Our surprise certainly affected his combat effectiveness. Of course, we cannot discount the circumstances in which we found ourselves. Everyone realized that our plan was almost the only chance to hold the bridgehead and to survive. We, Alexander Terentievich, were born in a shirt. With these words, Lieutenant Yelegin appeared at the battalion's NP. Right in the shirt? What are you talking about? Ivan Ivanovich. Note you know, the Germans were ready to slam the bag shut, and we slipped out. Thank the commander, nodded in my direction Presnyakov. He stopped us in time. Otherwise the damp earth would have been our shirt. Enough Igor Tarasovich in praise of praise. If it wasn't for me, someone else would have reached this point. Better, comrades, let's think about what we'll do if the Germans start attacking again. We began to go over possible options, but suddenly we heard the excited voice of the observer. Now is a crossing ours. The soldier looked at the bend of the river and smiled happily. From the eastern bank was a raft, on which stood the gun. Nearby soldiers were loading the second one. Here it is, the long-awaited help. But the joy did not last long. From the direction of Gurno came a rumble, and almost immediately rolled out a dozen or two Junkers in an arc. Over Lesny Kalupi arc stretched into a predatory wedge, and the planes rushed to the crossing. One could see how in a dive they threw their deadly cargo over the Vistula and its banks. The surface of the river was showered with fountains of water. One of them stood at the very edge of the raft. The raft tilted sideways, and the howitzer slipped into the water. Fascist vultures, having closed the formation, were again coming in for bombardment. At that moment our fighters appeared and threw themselves on top of the Junkers. The wedge of enemy planes broke. Hitler's bombers staggered in different directions and, dropping bombs wherever they could, began to leave. But that was not the case. Our pilots managed to set two Junkers on fire. One found its end at the edge of the western shore. The other collapsed over the very German positions. Encouraged by our success in the sky, I turned my gaze to the river surface. But neither the ferry nor the artillerymen with sappers were visible. So much for the help, you sighed nearby Yelegin. They've got it right, you bastards. Let them go down. Look what they did to the other rafts. I gave binoculars to Ivan Ivanovich. Look to the left of the crabapple. Several bombs hit the ready rafts. The explosions wiped out the sappers' labour, and now they were saving the remaining logs from the fire. On the island, the Nazi planes hit the firing position of the mortar company. The bombs scattered the shrubbery, tore off the camouflage. It was hard to say whether they had hit any of the mortar men or not, but by the way the calculations began to eliminate the consequences of the raid, it was possible to judge that the fascists had not done much damage. Ponomarev, who was in the trench with me, could not stand it. Alive. Well done, Koretsky, saved people. I understood the joy of the company commander, his pride for his subordinates, for the same commander of the 1st Platoon, Senior Lieutenant Sergei Koretsky, a young but fearless officer. The thing is that Koretsky's platoon crossed the Vistula in the morning, when the Germans were already shelling the river. During the crossing, an enemy shell damaged one of the rafts. Under the weight of the cargo began to separate logs, and the mortar commander was confused. All this was seen by Koretsky, who was on the neighbouring raft. Squad, leave the raft, ordered Koretsky. The senior lieutenant jumped into the Vistula, boiling with explosions, swam up to the soldier. Calm down, comrades. Don't let the logs separate. Take care of the mortar and ammunition. Shells were bursting. Nazi mines were tearing up the water, but the mortars continued to swim to the opposite shore. It is not by chance that a few days later in the award list, for the Communist Senior Lieutenant Sergei Ivanovich Koretsky, the words, "During the forcing of the Vistula he showed bravery and courage. Under the hurricane fire of the enemy managed to save the personnel and material part of the weapon. How could not be proud of the company commander, such a subordinate?" No sooner had the fires burned out in the Vistula floodplain than a new group of fascist planes arrived and began to pound us. The roar of sirens, the rumble of explosions, the ground was shaking. There was dust in the eyes, ears and nose, smoke-covered trenches, passages. On our piece of land is burning everything that has not burned out during the day, and airplanes keep diving, dropping more and more bombs. My throat was sore, my head was buzzing. I was thirsty. I lifted myself up, looked out of the trench. The earth together with the burnt shrubbery rolled down on me in waves. It felt like being on the deck of a ship and being rocked by a storm. Nearby, an observer sergeant was wiping his eyes. He was saying something to me, shaking his head, but I heard nothing. It was only after about 10 or 15 minutes that I felt better, though my ears were still ringing and my head felt like a hoop. What an atrocity! Captain Presniakov turned his head. One more raid like this and you could be put to death. They are taking revenge for the last counterattack. As for the forefathers, it will not come to that. The sun is setting, unless they come again now. Send messengers to the companies with orders to be ready to repel the enemy. Meanwhile, the day was fading. A hard, bloody day for us. It is difficult to express in words, and in general it is hardly possible to describe how much we had to bear and endure on this small bridgehead, to spend moral and physical forces for its retention, as well as to tell about the feats committed by people. No one spared neither blood nor life for the sake of accomplishing the task. While waiting for help, we continued to put ourselves in order. The enemy did not stop exhausting artillery and mortar fire. Shells and mines often put people out of action. I don't remember at what hour of the evening the medic stopped near the NP. A groan came from the stretcher. "Who are you carrying, guys?" Captain Presniakov asked the soldiers. The party secretary, an elderly man, answered in a sedate manner. "What? I involuntarily burst out. "Lieutenant Malagin?" "Him, comrade captain. During the artillery attack he was hit, and seriously." I ran out of the trench and stopped by the stretcher. The battalion commander's shoulder and neck were covered with bandages, through which blood was oozing. Malagin's broad-skinned face had turned pale. His nose was sharpened. A black clot curled on his lips. "Now, could you not be safe, Vasily Fedorovitch?" Malagin opened his eyelids, found me with his eyes, tried to smile, but a grimace of pain contorted his face. Biting his pale lips, Malagin exhaled. "Is that you, Commander? I got caught in the wrong way." I looked at Vasily Fedorovitch, and my heart clenched. I did not want to part with this intelligent and kind man, a man of great heart. Yesterday evening, going around the people preparing to force the river, I met him at the very edge of the water. Tatog, in his usual manner, unhurriedly but clearly, was explaining to the men how to handle the boat. When he saw me, he straightened up. "Go on, Vasily Fedorovitch. The boys must be from the steppes." "That's right, Comrade Captain Steppsman, from the Salish China. I see they look at the flatboats with shyness. I decided to help them." For some time, the lieutenant explained to the soldiers the questions connected with the forthcoming forcing, and in the meantime inquired about their mood. Satisfied and excited, he sought me out. We once again discussed the arrangement of the communists on the boats. Vasily Fedorovitch characterized the party leaders of the groups and their deputies appointed for the time of the task. "Well, you will have to force with the last echelon." I said. "What do you mean, Comrade Captain? How can I stay here when the communists are on the bridgehead? I ask you to allow me to go in the first group. Captain Bukharin can manage here too." For several minutes the lieutenant politely, but insistently proved the necessity of his presence in the first ranks of the landing force, and he begged me. Having landed with a group on the island, Malagin attacked the enemy's combat guard. In critical minutes of reflection of one of the counterattacks of the enemy, the calculation of the machine gun was out of order. The fascists were approaching. Vasily Fedorovitch threw a glance to the right, left. Not far away in a crater saw the commander of the machine gun platoon called him. The junior lieutenant turned around. "Me to the machine gun?" Malagin pointed at the lonely Maxim. Nearby ran a petty officer of the 6th Company. Patog stopped him. "Lieutenant, the second number to the junior lieutenant." Sir and petty officer rushed to fulfill the order. Malagin himself rushed to the flank of the company. Fighters, seeing the party secretary, sighed with relief. The platoon commander was out of the line, and the appearance of Vasily Fedorovitch, of course, pleased them. Malagin checked the disc. Sapper shovel leveled the table, fixed the Coulter's detiar, corrected the bumper. He did everything quickly, and now the personal example of the party leader was better than any other agitation. The enemy's plan to dissect the company's defences failed. Duty. What a capacious this concept in general, and for a party worker in particular. For him there are no trifles. Everything is important. Everything is necessary, from the soldier's life to what the fighter thinks about what he lives. This is how Vasily Fedorovich Malygin, a man of great life experience and generous soul, built his work with people. He always had a word for the fighter and the commander. He would praise one, give a hint to the second, sympathize with the third. You can see a man revived, smiling, and his work is going well. Vasily Fedorovich had a special gift of calling people to revelation. It so happened that after his arrival in the battalion on the second or third day, in a heart-to-heart conversation, I told him all my short life. He did not shy away from telling me about himself. From that evening we somehow became closer, and where it was particularly difficult, I sent Malygin there. I knew. This difficult day was no exception. The battalion's parter door was in the place where the spearhead of fascist attacks was directed, but the bullets missed Malygin, and now when the fascists calmed down, he was wounded. It was a pity to part with Vasily Fedorovich, but nothing could be done. War is war. I knelt down, shook the weakened hand of the partorg. "Never. Hurry back. I'll be waiting." The orderlies lifted the stretcher and carried Lieutenant Malygin to the crossing. I looked after the procession, and I could hear his voice in my ears. "I'll be back. I'll definitely be back, Commander." Unfortunately, our new meeting on the front roads with him did not take place. For more than a year, Malygin was lying in hospitals. Doctors were patching up his tortured body. On a hospital bed, he met the victory day. In the end, his mighty organism defeated the disease. Demobilized from the Soviet army, Vasily Fyodorovich Malygin worked as a forestry supervisor in Kiev region, worked in Chernigov region, in Prikopatya, in the Arkhangelsk region. More than 20 years later, he sought me out. "Do you recognize me, Commander?" A stocky man with a huge curly beard spoke in a painfully familiar voice a few steps away. "Vasily Fedorovich." "I, Alexander Terentyevich. I, my commander." We embraced tightly in the soldier's way, embraced. We talked. That day, military fate separated us from many people who had become close to me. Petty Officer Alexander Petrov, a man of rare courage, was wounded by a shell fragment. He arrived to us in March, having a solid record of underground work behind enemy lines. In the Ukrainian Polsy Petrov sabotage group, blew up enemy echelons, destroyed police officers, crushed small enemy garrisons, conducted reconnaissance work. The group prepared the basis for the creation of a large partisan detachment under the command of F.M. Elikov. With the arrival of the Soviet army, the People's Avengers joined its ranks. Among them was Alexander Ivanovich Petrov. Experienced, fearless, he quickly stood out from among the junior commanders. He more and more often began to be entrusted with independent assignments. At Vladimir Volinsky, Petrov's group, under the very nose of the Germans, captured a tongue, for what all participants of this sortie were awarded with state honors. Alexander Ivanovich was eager to fight. I had to stop, to restrain the boiling over the edge boiling energy. "Petrov will be a good platoon commander," once said about him the chief of staff of the regiment, Major Modin, cautious in assessing people man. For now, for lack of such a position, Sergeant Petrov was appointed petty officer of the company and promoted in the military rank. But economic troubles did not temper the ardor of Alexander Ivanovich, and no wonder that he was in one of the first groups, forcing the Vistula. Perfectly mastering a machine gun, he silenced an enemy firing point. When he ran out of ammunition, he crushed the Germans with a captured automatic rifle, fought off the Nazis with grenades. During the last attack, he was wounded. The story about this courageous man would not be complete, if not to add that after treatment in the hospital, Alexander Ivanovich returned to the Sandomir bridgehead and reached Prague. A communist since the 40th year, Petrov, after the war, worked in one of the mines of the Donetsk basin, headed the party organization. For his valiant work, he was awarded the Certificate of Honor of the Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian SSR, was awarded the Order of Badge of Honor, the Order of October Revolution, and a number of other awards. This is how he is. A soldier, miner, party worker, Alexander Ivanovich Petrov, whose life is a feat. But let's return to the events of that evening. The enemy, realizing that we will try to use the dark time to transfer forces to the bridgehead, illuminated the island, the water surface of the Vistula with rockets, conducted heavy fire. Shells and mines flew over us and burst deafeningly at the crossing, up and down the river. The groaning rumble of 6-barrel mortars was particularly disturbing. At about midnight, a German reconnaissance plane arrived. From the right bank, it was hit by regimental anti-aircraft machine guns. Lines of tracer bullets streaked the night sky. "Hey, they don't get it," Captain Presnyakov said regretfully. "What a shame. He's going to hang lights now, son of a bitch." As if in response to his words, a bright torch flashed over the island, followed by a second one. A few minutes later, the lanterns revealed the mirror of the river from the darkness. In the pale blue light were clearly visible boats and rafts on the Vistula. The Germans instantly concentrated fire on the section of the crossing. The bursts were hard to see. Only millions of splashes shimmered in fanciful fans, indicating where the shells had fallen. From the opposite bank rumbled our batteries. The German artillerymen transferred part of the fire to them. "The whistling has begun," reacted to the duel played out Presnyakov and spat angrily in the direction of the enemy, as if he would not disrupt the crossing. "It is unlikely that he will succeed. He will be exhausted, but it can interfere." For 40 minutes, the fire sparks of the artillery duel raged. Neither our nor the German battery did not want to yield, but, apparently fed up with the fruitlessness of firing blindly, both sides stopped firing. In the dark sky continued to burn lanterns. Rockets snatched shimmering murky silver surface of the river, and when in the dim light for a while appeared rafts or pontoons, the German defences came alive again. The crossing continued. At about 1 a.m., the commander of the 1st Battalion arrived at the "Take the replenishment," said the major. "We sinfully thought that you're dead here. One attack, second, third, and then without a break. But we see you fighting back, so you're alive." "As you can see, I'm alive." We hugged each other. "Things are happening there." "Yeah," he told me. "They found out that you were caught here, dispatch after dispatch. The Corps Artillery Regiment arrived to support you. Flamethrowers are on their way. I saw tanks too. Wait, okay?" Suddenly jumped to attention. "I brought your elders with ammunition. Jarosovich, distribute to companies." Satisfied, Presnyakov went to give orders, and we went to the right flank to inspect the area that was to occupy the 1st Battalion. No sooner had I returned to the NP than the telephone, which had been silent for several hours, came to life. Sergeant Dizin picked up the receiver and shouted into the microphone in an excited voice. "I'm listening." "Who?" "Sergeant Dizin here. I'm transmitting." Dismine turned to me. "Comrade Captain, Major Modin for you?" "Yes, Comrade 2. At last, I hear the familiar deaf and dull voice of the regiment's Chief of Staff. "How are you doing there? Are you holding up?" "Congratulations." "Congratulations on what?" "What do you mean?" "On your success. You're probably sitting there drinking tea. You don't know what kind of fame you've gotten here." "Oh, I don't have time for tea." I'm kidding. I can imagine what a lot of money you had to make." I started to report to the Chief of Staff about the situation, but Nikolai Sergeyevich interrupted. "Afterwards. I'm here about what? Now a representative from Bereza will come to you. Help him to settle down there." I was called by the regiment commander. It was not far to go. Major Pavliuk with the control cell. The remaining scouts and machine gunners moved to the location of the battalion. Valentin Yevstafevich listened to the report on the latest events in the battalion, invited me to sit down. "I've sketched something here." He unfolded a map. "But you'll know better. Did Modin call?" "Yes, he did." "So you know that not only artillerymen, but also tanks will come to us. We need to think about where and how best to deploy them. We'll expand the bridgehead at dawn." In the corner of the dugout, phone roared. After a conversation on the phone, Kompolka explained. "Division headquarters is interested in the awards relay. Look, do not forget anyone there. Everyone is worthy. Present people to the high. The bosses promise not to be stingy." "Roger that." "If you understand, then go ahead. All tune in. Go ahead." With Valentin Yevstafevich chose places for the main and reserve positions of the regiment's artillery and tanks. The regimental commander already had the reinforcement firepower marked on the map. Consulting with me, he clarified his estimates, considerations, calculations for the upcoming battle for the expansion of the bridgehead. Pavliuk was concerned about every detail in the organization of the fire system. When I began to report to him considerations on the use of mortars, the major revived. Well, you say the fire of the regimental Min Battery and Battalion Mortar Company can cover unshot ravines. That's great. That's what we need. But we'll have a regimental artillery battery and an artillery regiment division, comrade major. They still have to be transported here. It's not a simple matter. How many guns did you manage to move? Only 2? That's right. So they're magpies. Pavlyuk was silent. Detach a few men to meet the units that will arrive from the eastern shore? Pavlyuk was silent, then thoughtfully said, "We have men on the shore, but they are few. Don't forget to instruct the guys. Don't delay a minute. Take some scouts to help you. They have already scouted the area. They probably know all the paths." That was the end of our meeting. I hurried back to my post. Tension gradually subsided. It was replaced by fatigue. My arms and legs were filled with lead. My eyelids were slipping. For the first time since the night before last, I remembered about food. There was a lull on the bridgehead for some time. Not even a burst of rockets was visible. I listened. From below and above the river came muffled rumblings, sometimes turning into a rumble. The neighbours had approached the Vistula. My heart trembled with joy and I looked around. The clouds that had gathered had dispersed. All the surroundings were shrouded in a bluish haze, the bushes, the trees, the buildings of the forest houses, and the island washed by the Vistula. I looked at the stars for a long time. "Now, comrade captain," I heard the voice of the orderly. "Tea is ready, and canned food is open. Bring it here. Take a trench coat. Call Captain Presnyakov and Lieutenant Yelagin. We'll have a snack." I heard the voices of the Chief of Staff and the Deputy for Political Affairs. The conversation was about the placement of the company arrived at the bridgehead. Platoon left in reserve. The other 2 will be placed at the junction of companies, narrowing the front of their defence. There's not many men left, especially Kovalev. We'll report to the commander. We sat down to have a snack on a spread-out tent. We did not notice how the sky began to grey. The shadow of death hovered over the land over which the shadow of death had been hovering for 24 hours, with small interruptions in the rumble of shells, howling of mines, whistling of bullets. The leaves of aspen were whispering mysteriously. The freshness of the morning washed away the settled smell of burning. We drank tea leisurely, talked. We remembered the last attacks. Many of them were unexpected, bitter, and even funny. It was difficult to evaluate everything. For this, you need time. But then we were facing a new difficult day as soldiers, and no one knew how it would be for everyone. But we were glad that we had managed to live up to it, that we had not ceded the bridgehead to the enemy, the ammunition, about which we remembered yesterday, the reinforcements that had arrived on our blood-soaked piece of land. A German scout flew by. From the trenches, belatedly splashed in his direction machine gun bursts. In the white light as in a penny, someone from the headquarters guard said, "Maza." "Now he'll bring the attackers," nodded after the departing plane adjutant of the battalion chiefs. "We need to warn the companies and the neighbours. It's getting light." Captain Presnyakov was interrupted by a telephonist who ran out of hiding. "Yes, comrade captain. The banner, the regiment's battle flag on the bridgehead." "No way." "That's right. Just reported from the regimental base." The sergeant telephonist's voice was full of joy. His eyes, reddened from exertion and lack of sleep, were burning with fire. The guards standing nearby smiled at the good news. "This is great, comrades." Ivan Ivanovich Yelagin rejoiced. "The regimental shrine is here on the bridgehead. Each of us has a faith in victory, fortitude connected with it. It is necessary to immediately bring it to all soldiers and commanders." On this day, we had to hear more than once from the mouths of soldiers, commanders, political workers, party activists about the battle shrine of the regiment. In the words of people were heard notes of pride, confidence in our victory. After the reflection of one of the attacks, Junior Sergeant Ivan Lunev said to his comrades, "I so understand today's situation. Since the regimental battle banner is with us, it means that we are not temporary on the bridgehead." Valentin Yevstafievich Pavlyuk and Nikolai Afanasievich Kulyabin made the right decision and ordered the regiment's battle banner to be transported to the bridgehead. During the difficult days of fighting, it warmed our hearts, gave us strength and confidence in success. The Soviet military encyclopedia defines the word bridgehead as an area of terrain captured by the advancing troops in the course of forcing a water barrier, or held by them during the retreat to the opposite bank. Depending on their position, bridgeheads can have tactical or operational significance. We did not yet know what significance our 3 and a bit deep and up to 4 kilometers wide piece of land would have. To our right and left the riverbank was in enemy hands. True, the fascists did not have a continuous front of defence. They mainly concentrated their efforts on covering settlements, tactically advantageous heights and places most convenient for forcing. However, judging by yesterday's wide front of fire of artillery and mortar batteries, the enemy kept under fire a large area. The past battle allowed us to make another important conclusion. Hitler's command had at its disposal reserves. The enemy counterattacks became fiercer every time. The battalion's defence area, a mostly flat piece of terrain stretching toward Lesny Kalupi, was shot through with rifle and machine gun fire. What a language, said about our location Major Modin, the chief of staff of the regiment who arrived at the battalion NP. Nikolai Sergeyevich arrived to clarify the battalion's defence area. What are you just clinging to here? Why? Captain Presniakov shrugged his shoulders. These trenches with communication lines, and we could do something ourselves, adapting shell and bomb craters and folds of the terrain. Between attacks, I emphasized. Yes, Nikolai shook his head, in full view of the Germans. And what can you do? Continued Presniakov. We have to adapt, so to speak, to smooth the edges of incompatibility. We have to tolerate them, us, them. True, all yesterday the Krauts were furious. We fought back as best we could. We fought back. Captain Presniakov was silent, glanced at the right flank. And now I'm afraid we will be annoyed by that height over there. It was about height 131.4. Although small in size, it dominated the surrounding terrain. From it our front line was clearly visible, especially the approaches to Lesny Kalupi. Not without reason, the Germans on the first day of the landing began to hastily erect engineering structures along its crest and slopes. We tried to beat them with rifle and machine gun and sniper fire, but it was ineffective. Besides, the enemy responded with mortar and artillery fire. And, frankly speaking, yesterday we had no time for heights. We barely had time to hold off the onslaught of the enemy from the direction of Lesny Kalupi. The danger from this malignant height awaited us ahead. We had to expand the bridgehead. By the morning of July 31, crossed the Vistula units of the 828th and 862nd Infantry Regiments. Krasovci placed on the right flank Major Kozivnikov's regiment. To put it more precisely, the bulk of the personnel took refuge in the trench, communications trenches, occupied by our battalion during yesterday's fighting. Battalion headquarters mortar companies, rear units were spread all over the bridgehead. Naturally, such crowding of troops on a small patch was fraught with consequences. The defence area, as already noted, it was necessary to capture Lesny Kalupi, which gave the enemy the opportunity to secretly concentrate available forces and firepower, manoeuvre them along the front and in depth. The way to the settlement lay through a flat piece of terrain, only 250 to 300 meters, but they had to be overcome under flank fire from the height of 131.4. This is what the adjutant of the senior battalion had in mind, drawing Major Modin's attention to it. Mitak, Nikolai Sergeyevich stretched out. It means that we must first of all remove this chirp. Taking binoculars from me, Modin looked at the height for about 5 minutes, wrinkled his forehead, and finally took the binoculars away from his eyes. Krasovski's battalions will go to the height. It's easier for them, next to each other. They will start. The Germans will get bogged down, and then you will move too. That's what I'll report to the regiment commander. Let him contact the commander and solve this problem. While with the chief of staff of the regiment discussed the nuances of the upcoming attack, the enemy was not slumbering. From the direction of Gurno heard a rumble coming from above. Growing, it filled the area, penetrated into the trenches, dugouts, forced the soldiers and commanders to break away from their daily business and look at the western side of the sky with their eyes. There they are. Here they come. Here they come. Vultures. The voices of the company machine gunners nearby were drowned in the approaching roar of aircraft engines. Modin threw a glance at the Nazi plan. The guests are welcome. Yes, uninvited. We should treat them properly. So far, unfortunately, especially nothing. Major was silent, sighed heavily, and continued. Well, I went to my place combat. Ducking in the trench, Nikolai Sergeyevich moved to the NP regiment. I continued to watch the fascist planes. Maybe they will fly by. I tried to calm myself. But no, above Lesny Kalupi they began to turn around to attack. Soon the first wave began to rapidly approach. Shots rang out feverishly, fluently, and resoundingly across the entire beachhead. A few seconds later, the first bombs burst with a heavy howl, cutting through the crackle of gunfire, and the ground shook and shook. Waves of compressed air shrapnel flew over us. The bastards are landing with 200 bombs. Presnyakov gritted his teeth. No less. My words were drowned in a new series of explosions. The bombs fell, it seemed, without interruption. Everything around shook, groaned, and rumbled. An unpleasant chill swept over me. No, I was not thinking of myself. Yesterday I had gotten used to the idea that the shrapnel and bullets would pass me by. But would the people in this hell of rumbling and whistling metal be able to stand it? Wouldn't someone's nerves give out? I run in my mind over the faces of officers, petty officers, sergeants, soldiers. Almost every one of them for the past 24 hours met, and almost every one of them saw in the difficult moments of frantic fascist attacks. Old men will not fail. Obviously, I was not alone in thinking about it. Lieutenant Volodya Baranov, the battalion commissar, stirred in the corner of the dugout. He began to say something to Ivan Ivanovich. Yeligin looked at me. Permission, comrade captain, to go to the guys who arrived at the bridgehead today. Baranov turned to me. Don't let them get cold feet. No. See what's going on. Before you can stick your nose out, you'll run into a splinter or even get under a bus. But he kept looking at me pleadingly. At that moment there was a pause in the bomb bursts. Yes, sir. Baranov raised his hand to the headdress and, grabbing the machine gun, rushed to the exit. Almost simultaneously a soldier appeared in the course of the message. Without a cap, gymnospear and pants in the ground and clay, probably, while running, not once had to escape the bombs. The soldier was breathing heavily, anxiety on his pale face. One of the new recruits. Presnyakov couldn't resist asking. The soldier nodded and, spitting out a clot of dirt, looked for Comrade Komplin. The company commander Senior Lieutenant Kovalev transmits. In Lesny Kalupi I noticed the accumulation of the enemy. I shifted my gaze to the commander of the communications section. Petty Officer Ivanov in turn looked questioningly at the telephonist, spinning with exasperation the handle of the inductor. Rizidar, do you hear me? Rizidar, repeated the soldier. The tube, however, was silent. He does not hear us, made clear to the petty officer. A gust. Check the connection with other subscribers. His voice was drowned out in the ear-splitting growing whistle and someone's shout of get down. Out of habit we ducked down, we were rocked, and a terrible rumble was heard. But for a split second before it something red-hot struck my face and ears. A sharp, merciless pain went through my whole body. Rainbow sparks spattered from my eyes, and it became hard to breathe. He shook his head and opened his eyes. Actually, the ground of the dugout burst in several places and slowly floated to his feet. He turned to Presnyakov. The captain was gulping open-mouth air, groping the back of his head with his hand. I called Igor Tarasovich. He did not respond. I touched his shoulder, but even then he did not react. And only when I took his hand, Presnyakov looked at me with dazed eyes, smiled exhaustedly, moved his whitened lips. I can't hear. I touched his ears. Shout louder. Igor Tarasovich shook his head in response, continuing to say something. It was clear. We were concussed by the blast wave. The telephonist was hit harder. The soldier hit the machine and was now choking on blood near the trench niche. The liaison from Kovalev was lying next to him. The petty officer was on one knee, covering his face with his hands. Wow, came to me a deaf, as if from under the ground voice. You are my mother. Have you been to your forefathers? Bukharin, I thought. My deputy in the formation unit at critical moments had a saying, You are my mother. I threw a searching glance to the right, left, back, and finally at the collapsed entrance to the dugout I saw Nikolai Yakovlevich. Gradually my hearing returned to me, although my ears continued to ring. Soon I could clearly distinguish the sounds of shells and mines bursting, which replaced the bomb blasts, and the squeal of shrapnel. Parasite telefarmed that tumbled and wailed. Parasite, what are you doing? You'll leave me with nothing until Berlin, you bore. Bukharin and I involuntarily looked back. The soldier, holding in the palm of his hand 2 knocked-out teeth, in a fit of rage was honoring the enemy. I wanted to stop the communicator, but Nikolai Yakovlevich held. Let him step back. Alexander Terentyevich, you don't need to touch him. Meanwhile, Petty Officer Nikolai Ivanov sent telephonists to the line, and from the commanders of units arrived with reports liaison. Officers confirmed the report of Senior Lieutenant Kovalev about the concentration of the enemy in Lesny Kalupi. It would be nice to cover the Krauts with artillery fire, nodded in the direction of the village Presnyakov. The proposal was tempting. To disrupt the enemy preparing an attack, or at least prevent him, weaken it, means to morally affect the Germans, make them think that it is not so easy to cope with us, called the regiment command. Major Pavyuk supported our idea and in its development suggested after the artillery attack on Lesny Kalupi to transfer the fire to the enemy's front line and go on the attack ourselves. Okay, think about it. Valentin Evstafievich said into the phone, "UA talk to Presnyakov and Bukharin, consult with Major Kulyabin." I worked out a solution and reported it to Valentin Evstafievich. He listened to me, approved our decision, said that the neighbours will provide support. The division of the artillery regiment tasked to suppress the enemy at height 131.4. In about 5 minutes from the right bank of the Vistula struck howitzers. Then the regimental mortar batteries joined them. Columns of dust and smoke rose above Lesny Kalupi. A little while later flames rose. Wooden buildings caught fire. The German artillery and mortar raid on our front line weakened and then completely disappeared. For about 15 minutes our divisions and batteries hammered on the enemy's accumulation and then hit its leading edge. Battalion mortar companies joined the artillery attack. As the best music we listened to this rumble, remembering yesterday when we had to make do with small arms, while the artillerymen and mortarmen were working the front line of the fascists. The commanders of the unit gave the last orders for the attack. From the battalion's MP was clearly visible as messengers were snooping along the lines of communication. Officers led platoons and squads to the initial lines. Most of the units arrived at the bridgehead at night, light time to organize an attack at the commanders were not to storm the enemy's front line, where he has every square meter of the area. EO means to bear losses. In preparing for the upcoming attack, I did not lose sight of the enemy for a minute. It is important to anticipate his possible actions. In this regard, we must give credit to Valentin Evstafievich Pavlyuk. He kept the model of the upcoming battle, its various variants in his head, and demanded the same from the combatant. Sometimes he would call you to the CP or right at the CP, start to ask you about your plan. Now and then he would make you put yourself in the enemy's position. How would you act in his place? Had often radically changed the commander's view on the fulfillment of his battalion's upcoming task. Major Modin, the chief of staff of the regiment, was the same way. A man of reasoning, calm, with a sharp analytical mind, Nikolai Sergeyevich was often at the front line. In a soldier's cloak and cape went around platoons and companies, talked with soldiers and junior commanders, listened to their opinions and advice. If he saw an irregularity, a mistake, he prompted, helped to correct it. He did it tactfully, without raising his voice. With the regiment commander, they complemented each other. Pavlyuk, hot, impetuous, quick to a word. Modin, calm, balanced. In this I was soon convinced once again, coming to the headquarters of the regiment, but it was later. For now I learned from them. Observers reported about the Nazi advance from Lesny Kalupi. I must give credit to the enemy. He was able to clean up relatively quickly after the artillery attack. We had to postpone the attack for a while. The neighbours did the same. The Hitlerites reached their front line and then came under fire of battalion mortar companies. To the left of Lesny Kalupi also rose fountains of bursts. The Germans were probably trying to counterattack there as well. They broke out of the shelling with a dash. Here the infantry were overtaken by tanks, and from the gardens of the forest hulops appeared self-propelled guns. The short barrels of the guns spat out jets of fire. Heavy shells raised fountains of bursts in our front line. One shell hit a machine gun, and could see how the Maxim was thrown about 4 meters upwards, which immediately began to disintegrate in the air. The shield flew tangentially to the side of the trench, the wheels with the axle, turning over in the opposite direction, the casing with the barrel, and the lock fell almost to the position. Everything happened in a matter of seconds, and not even all of us at the battalion NP noticed this episode. Only Captain Bukharin wrinkled his nose, briefly dropped. "Nurses, where is the company officer looking? I'll give it to him now." Bukharin reached for the phone, but I stopped him. "Wait, Nikolai Yakovlevich, now is not the time. Afterwards. We need to warn company commanders. Open fire on our command, cut off the infantry from the tanks." The signalman who intercepted my words twisted the handle of the phone, calling the commanders of the units in turn. Captain Bukharin began to transmit the order. Events were developing with increasing speed. The main group of the enemy, as they say without wisecracking, aimed but the beaten path yesterday in the junction of the 5th and 6th Company. At the same time on the right flank, or rather at the junction with a neighbour from behind the hill, moved up to a company of fascists with the support of 2 light tanks. Hitlerites also appeared in front of the defence front of the 1st Battalion of the regiment, and further on the left flank, in front of Major Kozhivnikov's units, which at night forced the Vistula. "They are coming thickly," summarized Captain Presnyakov, watching through binoculars at the approach of the Germans. "But not with such insolence," I answered Igor Tarasovich. "Remember how they climbed yesterday? That was yesterday. Today is different. The artillerymen Nortarman tweaked them in Lesny Kalupi. They're not so cocky. That's why they're huddling up against the tanks. It's easier behind the armour." Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp shot of a 40-50 gun. During the night, we managed to transfer 3 40-50 tanks and 2 76M guns to the bridgehead. The firing positions of the 40-50 guns were cut into trench berms. The regimental guns were placed on the tank dangerous directions. And here is the first shot. The shell hit the forehead of the front tank and the fiery trace slid away. "Early," stated Adjutant Senior Battalion. "Hurry." Not in time to find themselves. I agreed with him. Oh, we should have waited. As if confirming my words, the ground at the gun embrasure itself surged up. 40-50 bounced and somehow immediately sat down. Presnyakov waved his hand in annoyance. Almost immediately, however, the gun crew stirred at the firing position. The gun barrel crawled from left to right, looking for a target. "No, Igor Tarasovich, the crew is alive. The crowd is probably shaking." The second shot of our artillerymen was more accurate. The German tank spun on the spot, spreading the track on the ground. But the 40-50 tank jumped up again and lay on its side. The heavy shell of the self-propelled tank toppled the gun, scattered the crew, and 76M guns struck from the side. The tank shuddered and sat down. Above his stern almost immediately burst into flames. The shell hit the engine part. While the Nazis were searching for a new firing point, our regimental artillerymen transferred the fire to the neighbouring tank. With another shot, they toppled the tank's turret and engaged in a duel with the enemy's self-propelled vehicle. "Well done, Kichulkin. The signalman couldn't stand it. Crush them. Crush the bastards. No art." Junior Sergeant Mikhail Kichulkin, on arrival at the bridgehead, introduced himself to me. He was below average height, thin and agile. After familiarization with the terrain, he reported about the main and reserve positions, asked for help in equipping a trench for the personnel and ditches for shells. "We will equip the firing positions ourselves, Comrade Captain. We will camouflage them, but we will hardly manage with the shelter for ourselves and ammunition. We're not strong enough." I liked the business-like tone of the gun commander, his concern for the men. I assigned 2 rifle squads to help him. At dawn, the junior sergeant reappeared at the battalion, reported on the equipment of firing positions and presented a card of fire, although in pencil, on a rather wrinkled sheet. But the terrain was captured accurately. The distances to the landmarks coincided with ours. "Keep in touch with us, and with the commander of the 5th Company." Already reported to Senior Lieutenant Kovalev. Interaction issues were linked, target designation signals were assigned. Then I rejoiced at the disposition of Kichulkin, and worried about him now. He fired 2 or 3 shots and immediately changed his position. Before our eyes, he managed to set fire to an enemy self-propelled vehicle. "Your tank fighters are different," called the regiment commander. "Give them my thanks and don't forget to present them for awards." "I won't forget, Comrade Major. Only these are artillerymen. Thanks for the reinforcement." "You say we don't help enough, but thank them for me anyway." Major Pavliuk was silent. Then, "Why do not open rifle and machine gun fire on the enemy? We let them get closer. Look how not to overlap. The German is a scientist. Understand me?" "Understood, Comrade Major." I looked for Bukharin, rockets Nikolai Yakovlevich, and the rocket launcher clicked in his hands. Tearing the air, the charge hissed upward. The telephonist shouted into the receive, "Fire, fire," and immediately machine guns, rifles, anti-tank rifles struck. Searching for targets, anti-tank rifles, and a Sorokopiatka rumbled all along the defense line. The German infantry, as if running into an invisible wall, slowed down. from the NP was visible as the enemy officers, waving their hands, continued to call their subordinates forward, tried to restore order in the broken and thinned chain. But the soldiers were falling, crawling, piling up near the tanks, trying to escape under the protection of the armor, not realizing that they were becoming more vulnerable to our fire. The German attack had failed. In front of the battalion's front, the anti-tank gun crew set fire to 2 more tanks. The denouement was coming, although one platoon of the enemy managed to break through at the junction of the Shugunov Company with the 1st Battalion. Having met the dagger fire of machine guns from the reserve positions, the fascists were destroyed. The survivors in small, scattered groups sought to escape to the rear. The moment for our attack was coming. By phone contacted the 3rd Battalion. Adjutant Senior Battalion Gudashnikov took the phone. Ivan Vasilievich, how was the baptism? Normally. Up to a company of Germans put down. Now we're getting ready to visit the enemy. We'll start the Sabantry on your signal. Ivan Vasilievich Gudashnikov, short in stature, with a thick cap of blue-black hair, was known in the regiment as an enterprising officer. It is true that he was sometimes harassed for excessive diligence, but who is not mistaken if, as they say, a man burns in the work. He calmly listened to comments, drew conclusions from them, continuing to be cheerful, energetic, eager to work. He was respected by his comrades and subordinates for his insatiability in work, cheerfulness of character. On the readiness for the attack informed me and Adjutant Senior 1st Battalion. Information about the preparation and progress of combat tasks in the regiment was put well. Majors Pavlik Humatin required from us, combatants, not only accurate and timely reports to them, but also inform neighbors, commanders of attached and supporting units. It is necessary for a commander to know how things are going with the people performing the task together with you. This is required by the Charter, but unfortunately, in the course of combat operations, some officers forgot about it, which sometimes led to undesirable consequences. We tried not to repeat mistakes. This, in my opinion, was the key to our success in the last battles. Instrumental artillery and mortar batteries hit the retreating Germans. Battalion mortars concentrated their fire on the first enemy trench. With binoculars, I was shooting at the enemy's engineering structures, but then I heard the voice of a telephonist. The comrade captain, the first on the wire. I picked up the phone. "Mount, it's I'm listening to you." "It's time," said Pavliuk. I waved my hand to Captain Bukharin. Rockets scattered the sky. I could see how the soldiers jumped out of their hiding places and with weapons on their backs quickly went forward. After 20 to 30 meters the chain was aligned, the companies were clearly marked, at the junction of which machine gun crews were moving in shifts. "Let's go," exhaled with relief Captain Presnyakov. At that time one of them fell down, followed by the 2nd and 3rd fighter. Through a glance forward, it became clear. The fascist machine guns we failed to completely suppress. In the air rumbled volleys of German 6-barrel mortars. The bursts tore up the ground and tore several men out of the chain. In this situation, there was only one way out: to rush forward and jump out of the fire. Machine soldiers rushed forward, but then machine gun bursts came towards the chain. The fascists were firing from the right flank and from the height of 131.4, having previously put on the ground companies of our 3rd Battalion. Except in Presnyakov's words about this height were confirmed. Almost next to our left flank lay a chain of the 1st Battalion, not far forward, and units of the 862nd Rifle Regiment of Major Vasily Kozhevnikov. They were pinned to the ground by the dagger fire of the enemy from the heights on the left and the pillboxes on the side of Dorotka village. Despite our attempts, it was not possible to lift the men. The attack choked. The battalions were suffering losses. In this critical situation, it was necessary to think about how best to save the personnel, but the regimental and divisional headquarters demanded decisive offensive action. "Well, tune in. What are you stuck there?" Major Pavliuk began the conversation on the phone in harsh tones. "Closest to Kalupi. It remains to make another breakthrough, and you'll be there." And after a pause, "Your eagles are not celebrating cowardice there." That was hard to take. "They are not celebrating anything. We can't raise our heads. We're killing people. Suppress the enemy at the height on the right. The Krasovites are attacking there. The Krasovci are lying under the height." At that time, the voice of the division chief of staff was heard in the phone. "What do you think, Captain Eltunin? Can be done in this situation?" Fyodor Fyodorovich Abashev asked, as always. in an even voice. To withdraw the men, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel. Suppress the enemy with artillery fire, then attack again. I realized that with my proposal I was incurring the displeasure, if not the anger of my superiors. I have my orders. The forest halupas must be taken. In this direction, and only in this direction, must think everyone, from the soldier to the division commander, and look for options on how best to cope with the task at hand. The fact that we have begun to expand the bridgehead is known not only in the headquarters of the Corps, the Army, but probably in the front apparatus. They expect good news from us, no matter what the cost of success, and here we are offered to return to the initial position, and yet I made up my mind. To raise the companies under the dagger fire of the enemy, when they lay down and the soldiers found themselves at least some relative shelter, it is difficult. Too great is the attractive power of Mother Earth, but it is possible. As a last resort, we will have to turn to the communists. They will stand up, as they have done many times before. So the others will rise after them. And then, a war without casualties is unthinkable, that's the truth. But no one is allowed to lead people to useless death, especially in the current situation, when the fascists have already come to their senses, oriented and only waiting to shoot the chains at point-blank range. Do you realize what you're saying, combat? After a short pause, said Abashev. I understand. If I did not understand, would not have said, you asked my opinion. So I answered, you can't, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, take a dogmatic approach to the execution of orders. You're philosophizing, Altunin, and here we are. Hey. Nah, I'm not worried about myself. If you tell me to, I'll be the first to attack, but we'll needlessly kill men, and we don't have enough of them. You're partly right. But understand something else. The men are scattered around the bridgehead. They're lying down. It won't be easy to get them out without casualties. But it's not reasonable to lie under fire and wait for people to become indifferent. Besides, the German is knocking them out. It is clear, said our chef in thought. But maybe we should try to raise the companies? The enemy will immediately press to the ground with concentrated fire. But if you order... No, I won't order it. We've been throwing men away too often as it is. Do you hear me? Yes, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel. If that's the case, let's find a way to get the men out of here. Time is of the essence. We need an artillery attack on the Krauts. We'll withdraw to the starting line. Reasonable, Altunin. That's what I had in mind. Bring in not only our artillery, but also your available firepower. You're closer. Your mortars can do more than we can from here. You get it? Roger that. But remember, Captain, me, Fyodor Fedorovich, continued. Forest Kalupi behind your farm, and you are there on the very edge. The task must be accomplished. We will take these Lesny Kalupi. We will definitely take them. The chief of staff of the division hung up the phone. Under cover of artillery and mortar fire companies began to withdraw. We were relatively easy to bring the personnel to the starting lines, as people were already familiar with the terrain. It was more difficult for the 3rd Battalion, whose soldiers and commanders had not yet had time to get used to the new place. Caught under frontal and flank fire, they were confused. Many were out of action. Large losses suffered in the 1st Battalion. One of the reasons for our failure was haste. Of course, everyone wanted to expand the bridgehead, but desire alone in battle is not enough for success. Desire must be supported by many components, among which, not the least of which, is suppression of the enemy by artillery and mortar fire. Our raid, however, was clearly insufficient. After the withdrawal, the men cleaned themselves up. Frowning and angry, they were patching up trench boulders, firing positions, clearing half-filled cells, communication passages, trenches from the ground, setting up communication lines. Machine gunners and anti-tank gun crews equipped reserve firing positions. Special teams carried the wounded and killed to the rear. They worked in silence without the usual jokes. Returned from the company's Elagin with the battalion's Komsorg Vladimir Baranov and from the machine gunners Captain Bukharin, Nikolai Yakovlevich silently walked to the rear wall of the trench, sank down on a crate of shells, sighed heavily, took out a pack of cigarettes and, without offering anyone, which was not inherent in his sociable character, smoked. He is worried, nodded Ivan Ivanovich in his direction, wiping his sweating face with a handkerchief. Yelagin hid the handkerchief in his pocket, corrected the hair that was dislodged from under the cap, came to Bukharin, sat down next to him. Hey, can I buy you a drink? Take it. He held out a pack of cigarettes. Zampolit flicked a lighter, inhaled the smoke and broke the prolonged pause. Well, Father's commanders, are we going to play silence? Is it annoying, offensive? Absolutely. What did you expect? That the enemy would present the forest hulops on a silver platter? No, after we captured the bridgehead, he wised up. Oh, come on, Ivan. Don't bother your soul. It's already painful here. It's sickening to look at the white light. Well, we'll carry on. Lieutenant Yeligin turned to Bukharin. Everyone's nerves are on edge. However, we communists have no right to sulk. People are looking at us. What kind of example will this be for them? Gee, such interfs. What is the meeting at the highest level about? Major Modin appeared in the doorway of the mess. We stood up. In the hands of the chief of staff of the regiment was a tablet with a thick stack of new sheets of maps. I cast a glance at them. This did not escape the attention of Nikolai Sergeyevich. We decided to visit the battalions, he explained Major Modin. Pavliuk went to the first, Kulyabin in the third, and here I am, to you, to find out what you breathe and how you live. I also brought some maps here, Presniakov. You'll give them to the companies. And it's time to replace them. Look what your map looks like. It's frayed to holes on the folds. Igor Tarasovich took the sheets of the map and began to look at them. Modin asked about the losses, but it was possible to give a precise answer only after the company commanders would show up with the latest data. Modin clarified the battalion's defense area on the ground, the system of fire. He was satisfied with the work done by the commanders and soldiers, advised us to disperse people. The most dangerous thing for us now is crowding. You, said Nikolai Sergeyevich. In the 3rd Battalion, a shell knocked out 6 men. Where is this going? Apparently, it's time to return to foxholes. It is difficult to equip them, but they justify themselves. Only a direct hit by a shell or a mine kills a man, but our main task is to expand the bridgehead by all means. We have to press the enemy all the time. To attack without tanks, exclaimed Presniakov, waving his hand. When the enemy has both tanks and self-propelled vehicles, is a ruinous business. No, tanks, unfortunately, will not be there yet. Modin sadly waved his hands. We can't get them across. Yesterday we made several attempts to transfer tanks to the bridgehead. From Modin's story, we learned that at noon at the regiment's headquarters there was a call. The commander was not there. Nikolai Sergeyevich picked up the phone from the telephone operator, introduced himself. Shwijen, gored off at the machine. Report the situation. Modin began to report to the commander about the situation of battalions. Merchants and artillery brigade came to you. Yes, they have. How many to the western shore? Not a single unit so far. Why? No means of transportation. Improvised means are no good. The cargo is heavy, they drown. You've got a pontoon battalion coming in. They can't make it. Pontoons sink without load. Sink how? Oh, they shriveled up during the advance to the Vistula. Where's the commander? Near me, comrade commander. Give him the phone. The major picked up the phone. For a minute or two, Colonel General listened to the confused explanation of the commander of the pontoon battalion, then cut him short. Is it my fault that the pontoons have decayed, or yours? Try to explain your stupidity. My fault, comrade commander. The guilty are beaten, and according to the laws of wartime for such matters, and Modin did not hear the last words, but by the way the major turned pale, he realized that the conversation took a sharp turn. Sweat was rolling down the major's gaunt face in large hailstones. He asks you, held out the phone combat. I'm listening to you, comrade commander. Chief of Staff, why do not you report? Idler's cover, and together with him and his lack of authority. Why don't you say anything? Nothing to say. So tomorrow report how many units of tanks and brigade artillery on the west bank. The commander hung up the phone. There was a pause. Major Palm wiped his face, sighed in relief. Well and well. Passed. Promised, if tomorrow on the west bank will not be tanks and artillery, send to the penalty company. There they are, the pies. But what could I do? It was so hot. The whole place had gone to hell. It was decided to dismantle some sheds in the nearby village of Nishava. The sappers and the men from the rear units of the regiment and the artillery brigade began to make the crossing, but we had to interrupt the work every now and then. The enemy opened furious artillery and mortar fire at the slightest gathering of people. In the meantime, the night had passed its zenith and rolled into the dawn. The pre-dawn darkness fell, thick and heavy, and the east began to grey. Then the edge of the sky brightened, and at once the river was no longer black, but blue. The crossing was sharply and clearly marked on the water. It was well seen how the tank climbed on the ferry. The first ferry moved. Comrade Captain, tanks. Tanks are coming to us. Now the crowd. Hold on. We jumped out of the dugout. I looked at the Vistula. At the water's edge came another 30 Chetverka. Behind it, we could see a third fighting machine. Here it is, help. But what is it? I involuntarily turned around and looked up into the sky, from where came the rumble of German planes. Stinging vultures. Unhappily, said Captain Presnyakov. Now the whistling will begin. Regimental anti-aircraft machine guns hit the enemy planes, but their formation did not move. Continuing to go at an angle at a dive at the crossing, water columns rose to the left and right of the ferries, but there was a hit. One could see how the tank tilted and slid into the water. In these minutes in the sky in our section was not a single one of our aircraft. Anti-aircraft cover of the crossing was also clearly insufficient. Perhaps someone will be surprised, say 44th year, and fascist vultures go away with impunity. The thing is that many advanced divisional units of our front in these days was assigned the task to go to the Vistula and seize bridgeheads on its opposite bank. Naturally, it was difficult to provide battalions and regiments with all means of reinforcement, especially air cover, and anti-aircraft units and units were on the march. While we watched the tragedy played out at the crossing, unable to help or at least alleviate the plight of the tankers and sappers. Soon Modin had a new conversation with the army commander. Colonel General Godov was again interested in the results of forcing the Vistula. Tankers on the west bank? Absolutely not, replied Modin. I was informed that the pontoon crossing is ready and about to start. It was, Comrade Commander. The Germans bombed it. At night? No, in the morning. At 25 again. What should I do with you? We should have started the forcing in the dark. But no, we waited for dawn and waited for dawn. Wasn't the crossing ready? That's right. We barely made it by morning. Where is he, that sapper? Concussed during the raid, Comrade Commander. The medics are bringing the commander back to his senses now. It's a pity. He would have rattled at my place. The Colonel General was silent, apparently thinking over our situation, or maybe someone distracted him from the telephone conversation for a while. Modin didn't hang up, he waited. After 2 or 3 minutes, Gordov asked, Are you listening to me? Yes, I'm listening, Comrade Commander. He continued to make the crossing. Tanks and artillery should be on the other bank. The bridgehead must be expanded, and we can't do without them. Tell that to the regiment commander. He's never here. Do you understand? Yes, I understand, Comrade Commander. We'll take all measures. The regiment commander is in the battalions. Nugai, I wish you success. The Colonel General hung up the phone. The bridgehead we have captured, its expansion, as summarized by Modin, continues to be given great attention. Yesterday, tonight, this morning, the headquarters of the Army and Corps were continuously interested in our affairs, and although we were not privy to the plans and intentions of the High Command, but I thought that we will receive here not only divisional units, but also neighbours. We did not know then that on July 29 the army with its flanks reached the Vistula, and that besides ours a bridgehead was captured in the area of Winiara, and then the army units clung to the left bank near Annapolis. But even earlier the 162nd Rifle Division of the 13th Army of our front captured a bridgehead south of Baranau. North of this city was also captured a small bridgehead regiments of the 350th Infantry Division, to which in the evening of July 30 began to cross parts of the 1st Guards Tank Army, followed by the 3rd Guards Tank. In different places on the western bank of the Vistula River during these days, fierce battles unfolded, in which more and more equipment and troops of various purposes on both sides were drawn. In this unfolding gigantic battle our bridgehead was only a small part of the operation to defeat the enemy on the left bank of the Vistula, although it seemed to us the most important, and the most important not only in the army, but also in the front scale. Not by the fierceness and intensity of fighting, reaching from the first day of landing to the limit of human capabilities. It reflected the overall picture of the fight with the enemy in the last days of July, August and September of the 44th year. Both sides set themselves decisive goals, doing everything possible and sometimes impossible to achieve them. The battles especially in the first days of August, were extremely fierce. On some days it was difficult to separate them from each other. Most likely it was one endless battle, in which the variants of using equipment, weapons and people only changed. For hours there was a rumble of bursting shells, bombs, mines. And it is not easy to single out something, to draw a line of demarcation, especially to give an assessment to one or another of them. I will tell you what I especially remembered and what archival documents have revived in my memory. Despite the fact that the tanks could not be transported to the bridgehead, Lesny Kalupi were taken on one of the first days of August. They were preceded by the struggle for the possession of Height 131.4 battalions of the 828th Infantry Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel Nikolai Krasovsky stormed the enemy fortifications for more than a day. The fascists, reflecting the onslaught, often went into counterattacks. Then, in one or another place, a critical situation was created. Nikolai Viktorovich Krasovsky listened to the reports of staff officers, combatants, and even company commanders, helped units when there were difficulties, required officers to look for the key to the capture of the height. Combat Majors Nikolai Ivanitsky, Levin Grigory Golovko, people experienced not once been in difficult situations. Listening to the reproaches of the regiment commander frowned, so far even at such organizers of the battle, such as they, whose names were mentioned more than once in the orders for rewards, and fame has gone far beyond the regiment, nothing worked out. The fascists met every time the rifle chains with dense fire. But still the height was taken. True, not without the help of the division. On the edge of the next attack, Colonel Fedor Semenovich Danilovsky put a special assault company. It from the front tied up the enemy, forced him to pull here the main firepower and manpower, weakening the flanks. This was used by Krasovsky. His battalions began to cover the flanks of the height. The commanders of the 7th and 8th Companies, senior lieutenants brothers Alexander and Ivan Lekov with their units managed to break through to the rear of the enemy, closing the ring of encirclement, covered from the side of Gurno with machine guns. They hit the resistance node. The Nazis fiercely fought back. From Sischitz and Gurno, the German command tried to help the garrison of the height. But having met the flank fire of battalions of our regiment and machine gun barrages, the enemy units coming to the aid had to lie down. Meanwhile, the Krasovsky continued to tighten the pincers around the height. The howling moved into trenches, communication passages, dugouts. The soldiers destroyed enemy firing points with grenades and, if possible, with Tolka charges. The height was soon taken, although the Germans resisted to the last. Only a few of them surrendered, and those who were shell-shocked or wounded. However, the battalions of the regiment managed to advance only 150 meters. The enemy pinned the rifle chains to the ground with dense fire and then tried to throw them back. Krasovsky repulsed the counterattack, unfortunately with considerable losses for themselves, and began to equip new positions, although the Germans did not leave attempts to interfere with the engineering work. In the course of the battle, somewhat improved the situation of our 5th Company. Senior Lieutenant Kovalev managed to push off a low hill, the remnant of an old dam covering the road from Lesny Kalupi. He, a German infantry platoon, and himself entrenched on this hill. Now with rifle and machine gun fire, we controlled the exit of the road from the village and could maneuver our forces and firepower more freely. Our neighbour on the left, the 862nd Rifle Regiment, also moved forward somewhat. Having blocked a 4-Hambrazurny bunker, he left flank covered the village Dorotka, and the battalion of Captain Gennady Makurin came close to the height of 177.9 and engaged in a firefight for it. The height, in tactical terms, gave great advantages to the enemy. It's located between Dorotka, Lesny Kalupi and Sischitz. It dominated the surrounding terrain. The Nazis understood this very well and prepared it for defense in advance. Already on the outskirts of Dorotka, they inflicted great damage to the battalions of Major Vasily Kodzhavnikov from it. From there, the Hitlerites, kept under fire, influenced the left flank of our regiment. It took a lot of effort to dislodge the Germans from this height. Step by step, meter by meter, we expanded the bridgehead. Every hillock, every hollow was stormed several times. I remember how a small shrubby hillock was changed hands several times. It was the same with the houses on the southern edge of Lesny Kalupi. No sooner had Shalaganides' platoon from the 4th Company gained a foothold in them than the company commander, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Odegov, reporter. The enemy had knocked Shalaganides' platoon out of the village. Odegov, you know the order. Not a step back. I was furious. We reported the capture of houses in the regimental headquarters. The officer stepped from foot to foot. On his unshaven cheeks played jaundice. Well, take it, comrade captain. I'll break in at night and take them, damn them, these houses. The Krauts pounced like locusts. Chalaganides is beating them, but they keep coming and coming. He doesn't have many men, so we had to move back. Wait, do not boil. Alexander Terentievich touched me on the shoulder, just returned from the front line, Captain Bukharin. I saw how the fourth fought. Odigov is right. The Krauts were climbing like crazy. Apparently, they got a beating from their superiors. They did not count their losses. Chalaganides put them there in order until they came to the end of ammunition. Nikolai Yakovlevich smoked a cigarette and continued. I know how the withdrawal will be perceived in our high command, but there is nothing to be done. One anger here will not take. Now take these houses. Honestly, I'll take them. Let it get a little darker. Let's see. There's nothing to see, comrade captain. Under the cover of darkness, we'll come up and hit the Krauts. At night, they don't get too involved in a fight, especially in hand-to-hand. They're afraid. Company commander briefly outlined the plan. With the onset of darkness, platoons are concentrated in the bushes on the southern outskirts of Halup, and at a general signal without artillery preparation go to the assault. But will the enemy allow it? He is surely not slumbering. In addition, mines and wire can be run into. He's got nothing in front of the front so far. I got posts there watching the Krauts. The Germans have only managed to equip a few firing points in the vegetable gardens and dig a knee-deep trench, and it's not continuous. We saw all this when we recently shooed them out of there. We did and gave them back. Now they do not sit idly by, but continue to dig in the ground. Whenever possible, we don't. That's at least good. I was silent, looked around. Odegaver, short, broad-shouldered, in a helmet and soiled uniform. The senior lieutenant looked much older than his years, although he licked his lips with his tongue and sniffed his nose like a boy. That's it. The house is behind you. Prepare to attack. There's a rational grain in what you're suggesting. With our correction, of course. While you're concentrating, we'll make some noise on the flanks, and then we'll hit the rear. Do you mind? Yes, I just wanted to ask you that. Nodegov flashed his eyes. Well, you see, we think alike. I think that Kovalev and Chugunov will help you. Now I'll report our idea to the regiment commander. Milfikar says, permission to go. Put his hand to the cut of the helmet. Odigov. Go. Major Pavlyuk approved our plan, although not without reproaches about the withdrawal. Zikantis, but since you yourself have decided to correct the blunder, said Valentin Yevstafevich, this time we'll confine ourselves to conversation. All the more so because there's no time for that now. Your idea is part of the general intention for the next few hours. The forest hovels must be taken. How many times can we tramp in front of them, listening to complaints? Anyway, you and your Odigov start, we'll join you. You'll get a combat order in half an hour. There will be all the specifics, including your idea is taken into account. At dusk, the 4th Company began to accumulate for a throw, from funnel to funnel, from hillock to hillock, across the burnt-out bread field, covering themselves with bushes and grass, where they still survived. The soldiers, under the rumble of bursting shells of howitzer batteries on the flanks and in the rear, moved to the designated boundary. A representative of Major Valentin Bereza, a short, agile senior lieutenant with fiery red hair, which was dislodged from under his cap, was adjusting the fire on the previously identified targets, now and then joyfully exclaiming, "That's it, we've hit it like a penny. Now we're going to turn." In the intervals between artillery bursts, we could hear the mines bursting, splashing short bursts of fire on the sides. Senior Lieutenant Ponomarev was shouting into the telephone receiver, "Violet, fire on the fugitives." To our right and left, the enemy defences were also shaking from explosions. On the north side of the forest Halup, some buildings were burning with bright flames. The settlement was increasingly covered with smoke. "What a Sabbath," muttered one of the guards at the guard station. "It's the Krauts' revenge for the day," answered Captain Presniakov. "Let them know that we are not shoddy either. There is still some powder in our powder pot." While it was light, the Germans continuously pelted us with bombs, shells, mines, several times counterattacked. Our batteries and mortar companies were silent, and now they burst with fire of all systems and calibers available in the armament, from the height of 131.4, penetrating the evening dusk, Large-caliber machine guns streaked into the flank of the fascist trenches and trenches. One could see how the fireflies of shell bursts danced. The 828th Rifle Regiment was also preparing for the upcoming night action. The telephone rang. The liaison officer picked up the receiver. On the wire was Chief of Staff Major how's it going? Odegov has not yet started. According to the general plan, after the 4th Company will break into Lesny Kalupi from the south and fight there, all battalions of the regiment will attack. That's why the Chief of Staff was interested in Odegov. The 4th Company is fighting in the outermost houses, reported at this time the Observer. I raised myself above the barricade. Short lines of machine gun and machine gun bursts streaked the yards of the settlement. Every now and then there were muffled grenade bursts, so they were close together. I glanced to the left, then to the right. In the twilight, the German defense was clearly marked by explosions, tracer bullets. Odegov just broke in, Comrade Major. I reported to Modi. Got you. Good. In Nikolai Sergeyevич's voice, it was not difficult to catch a note of joy. Everything was going according to plan. Events in the 4th Company developed as follows. Platoon Senior Lieutenant Emanuel Shalaganidze, bypassing the enemy guard, appeared in front of the German trench so suddenly that the Nazi observer did not even have time to signal, and the Germans continued to conduct engineering work. Fryer. His soldiers, almost at point-blank range, discharged their weapons at the enemy, finishing the fight with bayonet and butt. Without stopping, rushed to the blackening nearby houses, from which the Hitlerites ran out. Grenades went into action. From the flank hit the enemy's handheld machine gun. The German, without understanding, fired into the rear of the platoon, then moved the fire closer. Bogomaz. Senior Lieutenant Shalaganidze shouted to a sergeant running past and pointed in the direction of the German machine gun. Destroy it. The sergeant with 2 men turned to the lead-spewing firing point, and Shalaganidze and Private Andrieshko ran into the wide courtyard of the house. A half-dressed German jumped out. The soldier hit him with a buttstock. Almost at the same second, from the door of the brick shed, a line of bullets ricocheted across the stone-paved yard. Santhia threw a grenade through the doorway. The explosion cut off the machine gun line. Meanwhile, in the neighbouring courtyard and nearby gardens, PPSs were clattering. The platoon covered the small estate in a semicircle. On the right, one after the other 2 explosions rang out. The enemy machine gun went silent. Jumping over a low stone fence, Shalaganidze and Andrieshko ran to catch up with the platoon. On the right and left rumbled shots, hand grenades, whistling shrapnel, heard swearing, shouts, groans, stomping feet. The battle was getting wider by the minute, involving more and more forces from both sides. The 5th and 6th Companies of the battalion entered the fray. The German defence line was gradually sagging backward, forming a concave. It was necessary to intensify the pressure to break through to the rear of Lesny Kalupi and then bend the edges of the arc. The flanks, before the Nazis came to their senses and did not throw reinforcements, contacted by telephone with the regimental commander, reported on the situation. You say Odegov at the centre of Kalupi, interrogated Major Pavyuk. That's great. Valentin Yevstafevich thought for a minute and continued with an uplift in his voice. I have 2 batteries of the anti-tank division in reserve. I'm handing them over to you. Meet them and develop success. Don't let the Germans come to their senses. Valentin Yevstafevich had a gift to grasp everything on the fly, to react instantly to changes in the situation, skillfully used even the slightest outlined tactical success to fulfill the task. In every possible way, supported and approved the initiative in this direction, helped in its implementation. About 15 minutes later at the battalion NP, nestled on the outskirts of Lesny Kalupi, appeared commander of the fighter anti-tank division, Major Gorshkov. With Viktor Nikolaevich, military fate brought us together more than once. It was an officer who knew no fear. On the account of the commander himself was blown up by a grenade tiger. On the chest of 26-year-old officer, among other awards, shone the Order of Patriotic War Iron I degree. Hello, infantry, he smiled at me. How are you living here? You haven't killed all the Krauts yet? No, there are still some left for you. You, I answered in his tone. They're fighting back. The 5th Company is lying under their machine gun fire at the edge of the paddock. They won't let us raise our heads. Well, it's a fixable matter, said Gorshkov. Now we'll smoke out your Krauts, Alexander Terentьевич. From behind the bushes appeared battery commanders, Captain Mikhail Gerasimov and Senior Lieutenant Pavel Bunkov, with whom I also had to meet and deal more than once. "Fire, guys. As old acquaintances, we said hello. We've been waiting for you here for a long, long time." "It's not our fault we got stuck on the other bank," answered Gorshkov. "The crossing was delayed. You, infantry, what a hat in hand and to the other bank. We have the equipment. We won't have time to bring the raft to the Vistula River, as the Germans will tear it to pieces. Over there," Gorshkov nodded towards Gerasimov. "2 guns dived into the Vistula. One was pulled out, but the other is still there. But we'll talk about that later. Give the guys a task. He has 3 guns." Viktor Nikolaevich pointed at Gerasimov. "Bunkov has a full battery. We'll proceed from that." "Maybe company commanders will put it on the spot, Viktor Nikolaevich. Your guys will figure out where and what's what faster." "That's right." "All right then. Senior Lieutenant Bunkov to assist Odigov, Captain Gerasimov to assist Kovalev. Chugunov is supported by the battalion mortars." "Good," echoed Gorshkov. I called the liaison. Fighters, who had been in battle many times, well aware of the value of fire support, hurried to escort the battery commanders to the companies. In the meantime, the firing was growing, covering the right flank of Lesny Kalupi. We involuntarily listened to the rumble of battle. "Krasovцы are advancing," said Presniakov. "They are. Igor Tarasovich, they are. How's it going there? Nothing new?" "The same, except that Chugunov took a couple more yards." "Now not to count. We're gnawing through the Krauter defences, though slowly, but we're moving forward, and you say not to count." "Now things will go faster," said Gorshkov. "Let only connect, my guys." However, it was not so easy to clear the enemy. The fascists were not slumbering either. They brought reinforcements from Sishytsy colony to Lesny Kalupi, and although they now had to fight not only with battalions of the regiment, but also with our neighbour on the right, they held firmly. The night sky continued to be coloured with garlands of rockets. The fires of flare mines flared up. Then in one, then in another bridge, the Germans concentrated the fire of mortars and artillery. From our side, on the firing positions of enemy batteries, were firing divisions of howitzer regiment, anti-tankers, Gorshkov, and regimental mortars. There was rumbling, whooshing, squealing all around. From the companies began to receive information about the advance losses. We missed a lot of men that night. Senior Lieutenant Shugunov reported the death of Sergeant Alex Zatatnoy. I was particularly hurt by this news. Zatatoy supported us with fire during the landing. I remember the Germans are already 70-80 meters away, and he calmly fires from a machine gun, and also says, well, closer, now it's normal, and then he would fire a burst. Alexander Ivanovich personally destroyed up to a platoon of fascists in that battle. Stocky, unhurried, he cold-bloodedly arranged the soldiers, assigned each sector of shooting, skillfully managed the group during the Nazi attack. Several times Atachny managed to distinguish himself and on the bridgehead. When the company commander asked my opinion about his admission to the duties of platoon commander instead of the officer who was out of service, I willingly gave my consent, even somehow rejoiced at the choice of the company commander. Sergeant Alexander Ivanovich Zatonchny, for the feat on the bridgehead, was awarded the Order of Lenin. Unfortunately, the award came when the brave fighter was no longer alive. The battle for Lesny Kalupi lasted for several hours. Other estates, yards, houses changed hands 2 or 3 times. The fascists stubbornly did not want to give up the settlement. Not once the regimental headquarters and the division headquarters were informed about the results of the battle. Nevertheless, the units were moving slowly or were lying in wait for the artillerymen to destroy the Nazi machine gun crews. But Gorshkov's subordinates did not have time to destroy one firing point, as another one appeared next to it, and so almost until dawn. 10-15 meters forward, half an hour or an hour on the spot, and all the time the highest heat of fire. What only attempts were not made to fulfill the task. In some places the fascists yielded, in others they could not advance even a meter, but we persistently searched for weak points in the enemy's defense, trying to bend the flanks of the arc. The tense battle did not subside. The outcome of the fight for Lesny Kalupi decided the exit of a group of fighters led by Captain Bukharin in the rear of the enemy. Senior Lieutenant Kovalev found a weakly protected area in the Nazi defense. In all probability, it was a junction between his units. Either the Germans in a hurry did not have time to cover it with fire and engineering constructions, or they transferred machine guns from here. As we have seen, the Nazis equipped in this direction only a few firing points. Bukharin, a man of initiative, decided to take advantage of the opportunity. He selected a group of volunteers from the 5th Company, attached to us machine gunners and tank fighters of Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Shabanov. With my consent, went into the back of the defending Hitlerites and arranged such, as he put it afterwards, page that the Krauts in panic began to throw yards, firing positions of mortars and machine guns in the gardens and on the outskirts of the village. When the enemy tried to provide new assistance to the garrison from the colony of Sishitsi, he ran into an organized defense and was forced to withdraw with losses to himself. While we were clearing the last homesteads from the Germans and establishing elbow-to-elbow communication with our neighbors, who had also moved forward, Bukharin managed not only to hold the frontier, but also to organize a system of The fascists tried to attack, but were forced to withdraw. Captain Bukharin was awarded the Order of Bogdan Kametsky, E&I degree for the initiative shown during the battle for Lesny Kalupi, fortitude, courage and daring in repulsing the attacks of the Nazi invaders on the western bank of the Vistula. After the night battle and the abandonment of Lesny Kalupi, the Germans felt insecure. This uncertainty was given away by haphazard, aimless artillery and mortar fire from their side. In one of these firings at the battalion's MP, a call was made. I was urgently asked to come to the 5th Company. When asked about the reason for the call, the telephonist answered something incomprehensible, and once again in a guilty voice, "Comrade Captain," the company commander asks. He himself cannot come to the firm. Wounded? No. How can I tell you? The soldier wasn't saying anything. Having hung up the phone, I took my automatic rifle off the wall and nodded to the orderly. I turned to Captain Bukharin on the way out of the base. No, to Kovalev Nikolai Yakovlevich. What happened there? I don't know. He asks for me and it's urgent. Migansev was a wise man. In the morning he was fiddling with a German mine, saying if it can't be adapted, but it's an unfamiliar mine, until I scolded him and made him do defense. Now he's probably thought of something else, theorist. See if he's got a fire pattern ready. All right, I'll take care of it. Through yards, gardens and orchards we made our way to the outskirts of the settlement. Here began a winding trench with communication lines to the reserve machine gun platforms and firing positions for anti-tank gun crews. Ducking down, we moved along it. Be careful, Comrade Captain, we heard someone's bass voice. The Krauts are shooting through here. I looked back and saw a short, elderly soldier with a small shovel in his hands. My partner had been cut down half an hour ago. He'd just been sent to the platoon. A sergeant came running up. Not me, Comrade Captain Sergeant Mushka. How's it going here? All right, we'll refurbish the position. The sergeant looked at me and continued in thought. Something happened there at the company. I think it was covered with a shell. When? Where? About 15 to 20 minutes ago. They say our company commander was stunned, but Senior Lieutenant Shuganov was cut clean off. Sergeant Moshka looked back and nodded towards the half-destroyed building. They were in that shed over there. The platoon leaders and the platoon leaders are there now. I rushed there. In a small wooden shed, nestled on the edge of the garden, which had entered its maturity, the orderly was bandaging Petty Officer Mefodi Gorobets. Nearby lay overturned kettles with macaroni, cans of canned food, a flask with its cover torn aslant, from under which the torn edges of the white metal could be seen. In the corner, with both hands on his head, sat groaning Senior Lieutenant Kovalev. At my appearance, he rolled his cloudy eyes, tried to get up, but immediately, wrinkled with pain, sank down on the cloak tent. Sit. What's happened here? The company had gathered to eat, one of the medics explained to me, and then a fascist self-propelled vehicle crawled out and started to land on our front line, so they were hit by a shell. Kovalev was concussed, and Chugunov. So where's Chugunov? They took him out just now. He died. They put him on the opposite side of the barn. Where should he be now? Would evacuate Kovalev to the infirmary. Lieutenant Ruban says, don't, said the company's medical officer. Let him rest, and he'll come to his senses. They went around the barn. At the wall, covered with a cloak coat, from under which could be seen dusty chrome boots with knocked-down heels, lay Senior Lieutenant Chugunov. He threw back the floor of the cloak, cheek bones with slanted oriental eyes. His face was calm. No anxiety, no sadness, as if he had come and laid down to rest. I looked at Chugunov, and somehow I could not believe that he was dead. At the front, you get used to death. They are inevitable and frequent, but if you live side by side with a man not 1 week, not 1 month in a flurry of fighting, then somehow you get used to the idea that nothing can happen to him. It was not good, uneasy. Lieutenant Yelagin, the deputy for political affairs, came up, sighed heavily, and asked in a muffled voice, "Do we have Chugunov from Bashkiria?" "Yes, from there. He has a wife there, Anna Andreevna. I must write to her to preempt the dry government paper, at least somehow soften the pain of loss. After all, they had travelled together for hundreds of kilometres and had learned both good and bad things to the fullest extent. Many people will have to write nowadays," many sighed Yelagin again. In the battle for Lesny Kalupi, Lieutenant Ivan Isayev, Junior Lieutenant Kap Verivoda, many soldiers and sergeants died a brave death. Bitterly became from irrecoverable losses. Years will pass. Their peers, relatives and friends will pass into oblivion, and like a fog, the memory of each of them will disperse. There will remain only a common, the name of which is a feat, but each of them had his own life, and each could do a lot more on his way. The wounded were sent to the left bank. It was not easy to part with them too. Front life, big and small battles brought us together and fraternized us for the rest of our lives. This village was not easy for us. Nurse Captain Bukharin's voice brought me out of my reverie. Nikolai Yakovich also arrived here. At Kovalev, all platoon members are out of action, he reported. Sergeants appointed to command platoons. In the 4th Odegov and Shalaganidze remain. I know, Nikolai Yakovlevich. You better tell me, how could we allow that company commanders came together on the front line? I warned them, Alexander Terentidovich. They were happy that they'd finally taken Kalupi and gathered together, and here's a petty officer with lunch. So they decided. They could have decided. But where were we with you and the deputy commander? How could we miss it? I understand you, but what can you do? It's our fault. And after a short pause, we have to think of the living. That's what I'm saying. To warn people once again. Do not gather together. Keep an eye on it and demand that everyone obey the order. The 6th Company ordered to take Senior Lieutenant Serpukin. Together with him went around the defence area of the company. He passed along the edge of overgrown shrubbery shallow ravine, which, although issued somewhat forward, but gave the possibility of hidden concentration and approach. Did Nikolai Pavlovich choose? Yes, Comrade Captain, he Chugunov, replied Peter Fedorovich Serpukin. Successfully chosen. Now finish here for him. Give the platoon to your assistant. You have a good sergeant. Just instruct him. Yes, sir, answered Serpukin. Transfer and instruct the platoon commander. Nay, keep in touch with Ponomarev and machine gunners, and not a step back. Do you hear me? Yes, Comrade Captain, I hear you. We have full contact with the mortars. Ponomarev station is close by. Warn him to be careful too. I know him, he's often on the edge. They'll kill him for nothing. I'll pass on your order. Saying goodbye to Serpukin, I went down the freshly dug trench. Fighters were preparing cells, firing positions for firing, led to the ravine of communication passages. I went down into it. There was already a trampled path along which the wounded and dead were carried to the rear, and food and ammunition were brought back. I came to a shallow trench winding to the rear. Ducking down, I moved on. Here I met a group of fighters. They were carrying a wounded man on a tent. I asked who they were carrying. Metinti Petty Officer Gorobets, Comrade Captain. May, answered an elderly Red Army man. At Tice, the petty officer feel. Without memory, delirious, but the orderly answered for everyone. Heavy condition. As if, take him to the base alive, Sergeant. There we'll decide what to do. I'm sure my brother is already waiting. Brothers Feodosi and Mefodai Goropsi joined the battalion with the marching replenishment in Nezhi, where we were on vacation. They drew attention to themselves by their tautness, dressing, knowledge of military affairs. Mefodi, after some time, was appointed petty officer of the 6th Company. Theodosius served in the machine gun company, anti-tank guns, then took the supply platoon, and here, as they say, found himself. Initiative, thrifty host, he could get food and ammunition from under the ground in a difficult moment. Feeding people is not an easy job in the rear, and even more so in the conditions of the front line, when almost all the time you are under enemy fire and every wrong step and mistake can lead to fatal consequences. But somehow he managed to prepare food by the deadline. Doropsy were remembered for many episodes of military life. The brothers fought well. In one of the heavy battles, the platoon commander, Junior Lieutenant Fyodor Lipatov, was out of action. The soldiers were confused. Some began to stumble back. At this time, with the ammunition carriers in the platoon location, was Petty Officer Gorobets. Mefodi quickly oriented himself in the situation. "Listen to my command," he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Stop, get back. Now, Said." The soldiers, hearing the voice of the petty officer, cheered up, began to occupy the cells that had been abandoned to fire at the enemy. The situation was restored. There were many such episodes in the combat biographies of the brothers, and here is an unfortunate, ridiculous case. At the battalion NP, for my absence, accumulated a lot of cases. While I was dealing with them, the Germans went on the counterattack. A fight ensued. Petty Officer Mefodi Gorobets fell out of my memory for some time. When I remembered about him, the orderly answered, "He died, Comrade Captain. His brother is here." I went out, not far away in a spacious but not yet covered with a trench. I saw a figure with a low-slung head frozen like a statue. I came closer. Theodosius stood over his brother's body. There was so much sadness and longing in his eyes that I could not bear it. "Be strong, Fedos. You are a soldier." He nodded silently. There, on the bridgehead, the son of the Ukrainian people Mefodi Gorobets found his last resting place. His brother went further along the roads of war. He was wounded. After being treated, he went to the front again. He finished the war in Czechoslovakia. Now the soldier lives in his native village of Melancy, which is sprawling near Zitomir. He raised 4 sons and a daughter, despite his wounds and advanced age. The old soldier continues to work in the collective farm. Recently, he wrote to me. He was awarded for his hard work.